Kia ora. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, no mai hara mai tautu mai ki tēnei kauhau. Good morning to you all, and thank you for your introduction and welcome to us all today. I'm just going to start with a little mini karakia, and it's a waiata karakia. Tēnei o ka tuku mihi ki o tātou atua, mō ngā taonga tuku iho, kua waiho mai nā. And this is just kind of to clear the way for me to start in my introduction for you. And I do teach te reo Māori over to primary students over at the College of Education. And I'm going to talk to you about Zoom today. Now, Zoom is a video resource, technological resource, that we encourage students to use and communicate in groups. And I just began with the karakia waiata because that is something that our distance students were missing out on. And so Zoom is a tool that encourages our students to use, who are distance learners, to use waiata, singing, actions, so they can see me when I'm doing some actions and things like that, and they can practice that as a group and not be here on campus to use that as a tool. So that is one way that technology has assisted the use of Te Reo Māori and encouraged our students to collaborate and use this together. So what am I going to talk about today is my students' use of Zoom, and its uses of Zoom as a wonderful tool for second language learning, but also for collaborating and use of group work with students on campus and distance learners. I started way back in the end of 2015 by going to the technological team, the IT team, and saying, I'd like to do this with my students. Is there a suitable tool that I could use that would enable me to do this? And that's what I love about this team, because they say, yes, here's one you could try. So as we know, technology keeps changing, and Zoom was one of those tools. For those of you who don't know what Zoom is, it's kind of like, it's a video representation, a bit like Skype, for those of you who've been on that, but you can use a share screen. So the students can share what they are using. They can use the PowerPoints that I've been using when I'm teaching, and it's something, and they can record. So they can push the record button and send in the link when they have finished with it to me, so that I can see what they have been doing. And it's kind of used in an assessment way for us too, so it keeps them up to date and it keeps them using and practicing the Te Reo Māori that they have been learning during class time, and so they can keep using it at home. And I can tell you that because since the introduction of Zoom on my on-campus and distance students, the pronunciation practice for the class of grad students that I use, which is a short course for 1 year, the pronunciation for on-campus students went along like this. After using Zoom, their pronunciation was going along like this, because it enabled them to practice and share, because as you know, with learning a language, it needs to be used, so that this particular technological tool enabled them to do this. So I'm a bit of a fan of this tool. So yes, I started off in 2016 after finding out about it in 2015 with my distance learners, asked them for feedback and thought about the process of how to introduce this to my students. The feedback was so wonderful that I ended up using it with my on-campus students this year, and all the classes that I teach in, I now use Zoom. Really important when you're starting off with a new tool that the students of course need to know how to use this. So I think most of you know Penelope, who comes along and takes sessions for our students. We have on-site intensives. So it's about an hour, and it's a full introduction of the students, and they come along and they learn how to use that particular tool, and they kind of log in during the session so they can find out all about it. And I can tell you that they do get very excited about using this particular tool, and then they start using it not only in my course but in some of the other courses that they do, and they learn via distance. Same thing, so I have an introduction course for the distance students and an introduction course for the on-campus students as well. And they use it in all sorts of places. It's kind of cool for the students to self-select who they are working with, but on campus because they have been working with each other for a longer period of time. I choose them just in alphabetical order so that they're working with somebody different. But when they're brand new to a course, of course they self-select according to the areas that they come from, because we have distance students that we teach from all over North Island and South Island. Okay, and the object is to get them moving and continue to move out of their comfort zones. So, Zoom is a tool that I recommend you use if it enables you to do something that another tool will not allow you to do. So when you're choosing this technology, think about what it's going to enable your students and how it's going to improve their assessment and learning. So for me, as a language learner, there's kind of some things that good language learners need to do, and I've just got a little list there, and it's like creating and taking opportunities to use language, and looking at their patterns in language, organising their language, thinking about errors and what works and what doesn't, and be friendly initiators of conversations. So you can imagine that my distance learners, who would be individuals learning in their spaces at home, would not get some of these opportunities. But because of Zoom and them working in groups, this enables them to use those patterns in a smaller environment that makes them feel comfortable to use Te Reo Māori. So when we're talking about technology, we still need to think about, well, what is the good theories of teaching that we all know as teachers and lecturers in this environment. So Zoom enables me to do that, so hence why I was quite excited about this particular tool. Another thing is thinking about setting up your students to use Zoom. So it's not just a matter of Penelope introducing the Zoom and then you put them into groups and you go, away you go. There's a little bit more work that comes into it before that happens as well. So for me, we have students that need to be having turns at being the leader, because one student needs to download and push the record button and be responsible for making sure that the people who are in the Zoom session when it occurs have turn taking, that someone isn't dominating the conversation, that if someone is not participating, that person engages those that might need to engage too much versus those who don't engage at all, to encourage them to have turns and those kinds of things. So I kind of have a contract, and I get students to sign a little contract, and I'm going to talk about where I got that motivational theory and that information a little bit further down there. Dornier and Muir and Ibrahim, and I've got that information at the end of this PowerPoint, and it talked about the things that you needed to do for learners to engage in short periods of time and to motivate them to learn. So I use some of that information when I do the tool. Handy hint, when the students are recording, get the person, when they send in the link, to actually, if you're doing any pieces of assessment, for example, to record the order of the speakers and things like that, because as you know, some of our students do not look like their photo IDs. So if you're checking that students have completed the task or are participating, make sure that one of the tasks of the leader is to actually let you know who's doing the speaking in the order. So they need group goals and they need commitment to each other, and somebody needs to check, of course, that they're having their turns at leading the sessions to participate well. So we kind of revisit. I've got a 300 level course. We put together the contract, we talked about how they needed to work together, they had set out dates for who was going to lead the session, who was going to be responsible for putting the link up onto my site so I could see it could be completed and things like that. The second semester course for this group, I'll be checking in with how things were going, and I'll be reviewing the little learning contract that they had to make sure that they are working together successfully, and any improvements. So I'm going to be asking them what worked well and what would you do differently into there. So, so little handy hints for the students. Be prepared. So if it's their turn to lead, they're responsible for putting together an agenda, for checking up the Learn site, for making sure that they're covering the information that was delivered to on-campus students in the class. So it is their turn to motivate the others in the group to perhaps use some of the Te Reo Māori that is new. So, for example, we have kiwaha, which are sayings and praise, koia kea koe, which means you're awesome, you're great. So they are responding and encouraging people to use the te reo Māori. So they have turns at doing that. They'll have turns to do the karakia, and you saw me begin with one today, and they have turns at leading the waiata for singing. So you can see that I love this tool for language learning, because our distance students would not get these opportunities if they didn't have this. So I've kind of talked about some of these little things here. So the host needs to make sure that they know how to use the share screen option. So on Zoom, they'll be following what we have, a little PowerPoint, because if you don't have something ready for the students to use, they can spend quite a lot of time talking about how they're going to go about using the tool or what they're going to do in the session. But if that is all organised beforehand, then the session is shorter and succinct. So that's another little handy hint about using it. Gallery view is really important to use on Zoom, and that just means that you can see each student as they're talking and participating in the session. Another view is one student comes up on the screen at a time, but it's actually better, it's quite interesting for you to see what the students are doing and how they're listening to each other during the sessions, and sometimes you get to see the cat and the dog and the toddler coming in and all those kinds of interesting things about them. It's kind of a nice way of getting to know your students as well. They also, because it's language learning, they need to give permission to each other to make mistakes, because when you're on a screen, you're on, and you're being recorded, you're putting people on the spot. So that encouraging and learning environment is really, really important, just like you would have in any classroom environment. That Zoom session becomes their little classroom session where they're interacting together. So it's kind of like a little bit of an on-campus kind of interaction for distance learners. Okay, because it could take quite a while viewing all of these little options. If they're working in groups of 6, you can't do that, so you have certain parts of it. So I don't view all of them, but I will have certain sessions which I will view. So it might be one piece of assessment which I will definitely view, and then I will make sure that I have viewed at least one session and given them feedback for those. I have about 40 distance students and about 60 on campus, so I kind of make my way around those. Make sure that you're defining what they need to do each week on your Learn sites. On-campus students, yes, we kind of have to think about how we're going to get them when they're recording something. So they use one kind of laptop, and this is what my on-campus students do, and angle it in the corner so you can see all of them. And that session is recorded, so I can get about 6 of them in a group and recording their session. We trialled it first up with each of them on their laptops, linking into Zoom, but it doesn't work because you get a lot of echo. So that was my trial and tribulation. So I now know that my students book one in the library over at College of Ed rooms, angle their computer and record it that way, and all students participate, and then they just look at their laptops with the mute on so that they can kind of follow the guidelines provided by a little mini PowerPoint that they have to go through. Okay, I use Michael O'Loughlin's kind of work, because when you're talking about Zoom or language learning, it's about people's emotions, and it's about having a safe learning environment. So yeah, it can be culturally unsafe for some students, and it could be some health matters and things like that that people have, and anxiety, etc. So we still need to think about those kinds of things with a technological tool. So I've had one student that did not like being videoed, so she came along and did audio instead on her link. So we're going to need to think about some of our needs. Some of our students move from on-campus students move into distance because of some anxiety issues, so they're still needed to be explained that they will still be on the video tool. So we kind of need to think about those things. So I borrowed my person who examined my PhD thesis's work, and I looked at his little list, and I've just put it up on here. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but he talks about making sure that we are aware of the student particular cultural and individual social and emotional learning needs within the sessions. So we can't avoid all those kinds of things even online. So I just thought I'd kind of mention that. And I'm going to finish with some dilemmas that I've had with the tool, and then some kind of little mini solutions. Be careful with audio. And when I did the little actions to you in the sing, if the students all sing at once, which they want to do, there is echo feedback. So the voices will come in and out, but you can still hear them and they can still do that activity. And then I noticed that about halfway through, some of the students started getting brave. So whoever was leading the session ended up doing the karakia and waiata by themselves, which is kind of fantastic. Bud earphones and things like that, normal earphones helps with that echo sound. So it kind of, at the beginning when Penelope talks to them, she reminds them about those kinds of things that will stop a lot of the echo. Sometimes students leave courses, so your groups can change, so just be aware of that. I allow about the first 2 weeks, and when I get them to self-select, those that are not as organised end up self-selecting into a group that's at the end, and those are the ones that are interesting about at the beginning of a course tend to leave. So I do have a couple of flexi groups that are at the other end. Some of the students have trouble downloading the link, so that's often not enough space on their home computer. So I encourage students, if they've never tried it before, to actually give it a go themselves, go on and start recording and see how to download it, because that's something that we can't practice until they've given it a go at home. So make sure. Sometimes the recordings, they get very excited when they first do it, and the recordings get very long. So you can't be watching 40 minutes of recording. You really only do want to watch what you need, and so I kind of guide them and show them on a little PowerPoint of what needs to be recorded. Now, there is no pause button on Zoom. So once they start recording, you have to go through, otherwise you get 2 separate recordings. So that's just the only other thing there, and there's my references for what I'm talking about. So, kia ora.